One small step for man. The last few weeks before the test were a blur of kids winking and nudging me for no apparent reason, of Lindsay squeezing my hand supportively under the table in science class but refusing to see me outside of school, of Tad pretending everything was fine one minute and then wheeling himself out of class at top speed to vomit the next. It was a weird time. Huge things were going wrong right and left, but nobody was discussing any of it. And Tad looked awful. His hair was thinning, his face was all puffed up from the flattering combined effects of the chemo and the steroids, and he had random muscle cramps that made him grimace all through our tutoring sessions. But if I asked, he'd say, "No big deal, DA," and hand me another set of word problems. Then, exactly 1 week before the big day, I had two inspirations. Sitting in my room listening to my parents arguing over the testing, I figured how to make a grand gesture for my dad. That same evening, as I was falling asleep, I came up with my beau guest for Tad, too. The dad one was easy. All I did was pick a problem for my practice workbook that I didn't understand, and believe me, it wasn't hard to find one, grab my math stuff, and walk down to the kitchen. "Dad," I said, "can I interrupt? I'm upstairs studying and there's this one problem I don't get. Can you help me?" My father's face lit up like I was handing him the keys to the Beamer he's always wanted, while my mother smiled warmly and disappeared from the room. When Dad was done sharing all of his pent-up mathematical joy with me, and I was in bed, the Tad thing popped into my head. It was so simple. I would dedicate the Moving On Bike-a-thon to him. I don't usually like to talk about it with people, and of course Tad said it was dorky, but he always donated. Generally, I asked only relatives and my family's friends to contribute, so I never even mentioned the riot at school before, but maybe if I asked people to donate in Tad's name, he would see that a whole bunch of people supported him. I went downstairs and looked at the big family calendar that my mom always keeps on the breakfast bar and realized with a shock that the big ride was scheduled for the day after Tad's transplant procedure, which was kind of a good thing. Being out there raising money would definitely be better than just sitting around worrying the whole day. I figured the worst thing that could happen is I'd rake in some extra bucks for the cause, so I went to sleep feeling pretty good for a change. The next day, I brought my sign-up sheet to school and started passing it around. On the way, I'd gotten kind of crazy and decided to do 50 miles instead of 25. By lunch, I had something like 80 kids signed up to chip in a dime a mile. The weird thing was how happy everybody was about this. One guy slapped me on the back and said, "Dude, tit for tat, that's so cool." I had no idea what he was talking about, but hey, his money was just as green as everybody else's. Then in the hall before lunch, Brianna Slack marched up to me, handed me a crumpled up $20 bill, said, "Don't you dare tell him," and stormed into the cafeteria. When I got to our table, I was the first one there. Tad wheeled up a moment later with a strange glint in his eye and said, "So, DA, you finally gone and turned me into a poster child?" "Tad, I just wanted you to see that people care about you." He put his hand on my arm and said, "Jeff, it's okay, thank you." Then he looked around to make sure nobody could hear, then leaned all the way close to me and said, "So how much did Brianna Slack give?" And that was that. The rest of the week seemed to go super fast and super slowly at the same time. All we did in every class was review, 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 and practice, 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 except in Miss Palma's class, where we did free writing and improvisational acting exercises to cleanse our overloaded minds. The endless flow of worksheets was torture, but it also had a strangely numbing effect. And by the time I knew it, I was walking out of the building on Friday afternoon with nothing but a weekend between me and a date with the cruel hand of destiny, or at least the State Board of Education. On the steps, Lindsay rushed up, threw her arms around me, and gave me a rather bone-crushing hug. I was totally stunned. Between the smell of her hair, the feeling of our bodies being pressed together, and the fact that we just didn't do this in public, it was too much for my brain to process. I stood there like one of those antique wooden Indians from a cigar store as she pushed me to arm's length and said, "Jeff, whatever happens, I can't wait until the tests are over. I can't wait to have you back." I was still frozen. Jeffrey Alper, hello? "Yeah, right, after the test. Back. Good." Then she said kind of shakily, "So please don't be mad at me, all right? Everything I did was for you. Please know that." "Oh, good. For me. Thanks." She tilted her head as though if she angled her ears differently, she would suddenly be able to interpret my strange caveman dialect. Then she squeezed my left arm one more time and ran down the stairs to her mom's car. What did she mean, everything she did? All I knew about was the temporary dumping. Was there more? It's amazing how many times a day I am totally baffled by the people around me. I went home to the longest weekend of my life. The first day of the testing was a new science section that didn't even count, but I still spent Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights sweating through my covers over and over again. I kept having these crazy dreams. I'm chained to the wall of a dark, shadowy testing dungeon. I can tell that's what it is because there's a big torchlit sign on the opposite wall next to the electric pencil sharpener. A hooded torturer with a familiar voice says, "Well, Alper, now your butt is in a pile of trouble. Only 5 minutes left, and you still haven't even started. Why don't you get that hiney down from there and start bubbling in some answers?" "But, sir," I cry in anguish, "I'm handcuffed to the wall." I shake my arm and leg irons at him and add, "Can't you undo these?" "Sorry," he says. "I'm only a gym teacher." We're in the school gym, which is the actual testing site, but in the dream version, there are weird scientific devices hanging down from the ceiling where the climbing rope should be. Lindsay is there. She raises her hand and asks for a new number 2 pencil. The hair on the back of my arm stands up, and then a bolt of lightning crashes down and completely obliterates her. The kid to my left murmurs, "Harsh, dude. Harsh." I'm in the gym again, but this time it's decked out like the Death Star from an old Star Wars movie. The whole 8th grade is sitting at regular school desks, but we all have strange robes on, and some kids have green faces or antennae. I'm trying to use a calculator that's shaped like the handle of a lightsaber. The ghostly form of Tad appears floating in the air before me. "Turn off the computer, Jeffrey. Use the force. Reach out with your feelings." I start to put down the calculator, but accidentally push the wrong button. The blade comes flashing to life and cuts a massive hole in both my desk and my right leg. That same kid from the other dream is still next to me, but now he's wearing a stormtrooper helmet. "Oh man," he said, "that's gonna cost you some points." By the time Monday came, I was almost relieved to head into the gym and get to my assigned seat. I walked in next to Tad, who actually looked more nervous than I felt. We were going pretty slowly because it's so hard to get a wheelchair through a crowd, and every kid who passed turned to stare at us. I felt like I had a giant archery target painted on my back or something. It was as though everybody in the school was waiting for me to fail this thing. "Do you have a weird feeling?" I asked Tad. "Nah," he said. "I kinda have to pee, though. How long is this test again?" Lindsay walked by and squeezed my shoulder. "Everything will be fine," she said. I was like, did somebody forget to tell her this section of the test doesn't count? But before I could clarify, they started calling us to our seats. Just like in my dream, Flash McGrath was there shouting out the names. When he said, "Alper, Jeffrey," I could have sworn the whole 8th grade turned to watch me walk to my desk, which was just perfect because you know how much I love it when people admire my stylish limp. As I fidgeted in my chair, lined up my pencils a million times, and got my calculator perfectly aligned with the edge of the desk, Mr. Lorenzano read us a long list of directions for how to bubble in our names. The kid next to me, Josh Albert, who was not sporting any robes or anything, said, "Dude, how stupid does the state think we are?" Meanwhile, I was frantically erasing the line of bubbles I had just finished. Apparently, your name and birthday go on entirely separate lines. We finally finished all the filling in parts, and Mr. Lorenzano said, "You may now break the seal on the section 1 of your science packet and begin. You have 37 minutes to complete this section. Good luck, 8th graders." Just then, from across the room, Tad let loose with the loudest cough I've ever heard in my life and started rolling slowly up the aisle. Geez, I thought, how small could his bladder possibly be? But suddenly, every kid in the room, except me, stood up, slammed in their chairs, and started filing up the rows and out of the gym. What the heck was going on? Lindsay, who'd been sitting 2 rows in front of me, turned and hissed, "Come on, Jeff." I jumped up and followed. Honestly, what else was I going to do? By that point, Tad was wheeling his way across the front, leading a long line of students past all of our teachers, who were frantically putting down their coffee mugs and looking around for some kind of instructions. I guess their riot training was a little rusty. I thought, I suppose this explains why everybody was looking at us on the way in. As Tad reached the door, Miss Palma grabbed the microphone and said, Students, what are you doing? Come back here this instant." But when I looked at her, she actually looked semi-delighted. The cries of the teachers followed our procession into the hallway. I wondered for a moment where we were going, but I didn't have to wonder for long. The front doors of the school are only about 50 feet from the gym, and the whole line was heading that way. As soon as we'd hit the hallway, a kind of instantaneous nervous buzzing had started, like, "Where are we going again and why? Did you see Lorenzano's face? My mom is so going to kill me." But even over that, I heard the thunderous footsteps of Mr. McGrath as he pounded past us up the hallway to stop Tad at the doors. It was like a movie ad or something. Flash McGrath, the return. You'll believe a fat man can run. Everybody got quiet then, so that even from 50 feet away I could hear Tad and Mr. McGrath having a pretty heated argument. This was bad. I had to get up there and calm Tad down before things got even more out of hand. I made my way through the crowd as fast as I could and reached Tad's side just as he opened the door and Flash bellowed, Ibsen, if one wheel of that chair crosses the doorway, I promise you will be suspended. Fine, Tad said. He reached down and locked the right wheel of his chair, then the left. He looked at me and mouthed one word, surprise. Finally, he slowly stood up, hobbled past Mr. McGrath, and made his way out into the morning sunlight. I crowded next to Mr. McGrath, who stood panting by the open door. Tad, holding the railing in a death grip, struggled down the steps of the school as the entire grade crowded up behind us. A few of the bravest kids started pushing their way out the doors, too, as Tad reached the bottom of the stairs and held up one hand in the V for victory sign. Flash turned to me and said, You might as well get down there before your crazy friend falls flat on his duff and kills himself. I started out, but by the time I got down there, Brianna Slack had rushed past me, dragging Tad's wheelchair. She put it down right behind him. He collapsed in the chair and looked up at her. Tad, she said, you still stick out your tongue when you walk. As Tad smiled weakly, I looked past Brianna and realized that there was a TV news van at the curb and a camera crew charging across the lawn in our direction. The beautiful blonde-haired reporter shoved a microphone right up in Tad's face and he started talking. Then suddenly, Lindsay was right between Tad and me. She put one hand on his shoulder and reached for my hand with the other. That was when I looked down at my own hand and realized I was still holding my calculator. I swear, I must be the lamest rioter in history. Wow, who knew they got New Jersey news stations in Africa? Hi, Jeff. I don't believe this. Annette just sent me a link to 2 MeTube videos. The first one is a slick little homemade call to revolution by your friend Tad, produced by some girl named Lindsay. I can't believe he had the guts to ask every kid in New Jersey to walk out on the state tests. And I can't believe the clip has been viewed 23,000 times. The second one is a clip from last night's local news there. I suspect you know the one that I mean. God, Jeff, I've been asking Mom about you all year, and she keeps telling me you're doing fine. Now I find out that you might fail math and get held back in 8th grade, and Tad has cancer again. That must be terribly hard for you. Plus, apparently you've caused the first riot in the history of the middle school. And who's the chick with her arm around you on TV? Is that Lindsay? If so, she's kind of cute. Aw, my little Jeffy's growing up. Do I need to fly home right away and give you the talk? Actually, I was already sort of planning to come home again next month for your graduation. You probably don't know this, but I had asked Annette not to contact me unless there was an emergency. Since then, I've spent half my time praying for an emergency. I'm sorry, that sounds horrible, but when I saw the message in my inbox today, I was almost relieved. Not because of what it said, of course. I just wanted her to get in touch, even though I was the one who had told her not to. So I've been wondering lately why I'm still here. About the message itself. I thought Tad was really brave to think of that whole thing, and I'm amazed that he actually got everyone in your grade to go along with it. Organizing it through his MyFace page in the first video clip was genius, too. This Lindsay girl did a great job with all the video editing effects and all, but I think the real power of the piece was what Tad said. They tell us to stand up for people who are weak and defenseless, and then they threaten to fail anyone who needs a little extra help. Brilliant. And then when he said to the reporter, I take full responsibility for this peaceful protest. What are they going to do to me anyway? Give me cancer? Wow. He had to know that was going to make big news. Please tell Tad I'm impressed. He really stood up for you. I don't know if the school board will listen to a bunch of kids, but I do know they're always terrified of the media. One last thing. Just sitting here at this moment, I decided I will come home ASAP. I still don't know whether I found what I was looking for, but I do know I missed what I left behind. Can you do me one favor? Please ask Mom to get my dark suit dry cleaned. I want to look suitably fancy for your graduation. I know you'll make it. Until I get there, take good care of my little brother, okay? Steven. Take care of my little brother? What the heck did he think I'd been doing all year? Playing with matches and smoking crack? Plus, what was up with the melodrama? I still don't know whether I found what I was looking for, but I do know I missed what I left behind. Had to be the cheesiest sentence I've ever read in my life. It was a cheesy cheese ball covered with Cheez Whiz and served on a bed of Cheez-Its with the side of queso. And had he really been asking my mom about me all year? If so, why hadn't he just asked me himself? I understood the part about needing space to decide whether to bond for life with Annette, but I was his brother. Did he really need to be off limits for a year to figure out whether to be related to me or not? The sad part was I was completely thrilled that he was coming home. The rest of the statewides weren't as dramatic as the first day. On Tuesday, when we walked into the testing room, the principal, both assistant principals, and the superintendent were all there waiting for us. You knew right away this was a big deal because the principal never came out of his office for anything less major than a terrorist attack or a student revolt. I was standing next to Tad and Lindsay. Boy, were we popular. Pretty much everyone we knew came up and slapped Tad on the back or gave Lindsay a high five or patted my shoulder and said, "Good luck, man." Tad and Lindsay were the heroes of the day. I was back to being the poster child. But it was okay because when I looked at Tad that morning, I didn't see his puffy eyes or his constant wincing from the cramps. For a little while, Tad was his full-on angry self again. It was nice to have him back. The second our butts hit the seats, the superintendent started lecturing us. I won't bore you with the details, and I admit I missed some parts because I was distracted by the violent flopping of his hideous toupee, but basically he told us that the science test was postponed indefinitely. He also said that if anyone did anything to mess up the rest of the testing, he was going to call 911 personally. Yeah, that wouldn't make it into the nightly news again. Wheelchair-bound cancer patient arrested for free speech. Then the principal tried a softer touch. He never raised his voice, and his hair actually stayed in place. He said he admired our courage, but didn't want to see us do anything to change our promising futures. He felt proud as an American that we had exercised our right to peaceful free expression, but if we did it again, he didn't know what action the State Board of Education might take against individual students. Translation. You've had your fun, now sit down, shut up, and take the frickin' test, or else. Did these bozos think that vague threats were the best way to prepare our brains for 3 more days of testing? I mean, if they had threatened to make us wear their dreadful hairpieces for a day, then maybe you would have seen some seriously motivated students. But otherwise, threats just make kids mad. I have to admit, though, nobody tried anything for the rest of the week. After each day of the math section, Tad came zipping up to me and tried to go over every single problem. Of course, I couldn't even remember the questions, much less the answers I had put down, but that didn't stop him from grilling me in detail. I couldn't blame him. He had put more time into helping me with my math than I had ever spent on another human being in my life. On Thursday, when the entire testing ordeal was over, the principal came into the gym and right in front of everybody took Tad away to in-school suspension. I couldn't believe it. First of all, that made twice in 1 week that the guy had ventured forth from his hidden lair, and second, he still hadn't figured out that Tad was a bad enemy to have. He probably figured it out the next day after Lindsay had called all the local newspapers, the TV station, and the state education department, or after my mom and Tad's mom drove down to the district office and threatened to sue if anything about this went on Tad's permanent record. Tad was back in class by second period on Friday. Going into the weekend, it appeared that Tad had won the free speech battle. Of course, we didn't know whether the test scores would still be used to fail kids for the year or what my scores would turn out to be. But wow, Tad knew how to make a beau guest when it counted. Serrano D. Bergerac would have been impressed. Probably not as impressed as Miss Paulman and Brianna Slack, though. Our English class on Friday was one giant Tad love fest. Miss Paulman said Tad was at one with the spirit of liberty, and Brianna called him a hero. He muttered, "Oh, please," but I noticed he was blushing. Tad blushing? It was definitely a week for miracles. At lunch, while we were celebrating with ice cream pops, Lindsay told Tad and me that her dad was going to let her help him edit a commercial in the summer. He had been so impressed with her work on the MeTube clip that he was even going to pay her for her time. She was pretty psyched. When Tad congratulated her, she caught him wincing. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Oh, nothing. It's just, a side effect of the Gleevec." "What's that again?" "It's the drug that's supposed to be stopping the cancerous blood cells from multiplying insanely fast in my bone marrow." Lindsay looked stricken. "Oh, it's no big deal," Tad said. "Your boyfriend here has been through way worse. Like methotrexate, for example. Methotrexate makes Gleevec look like children's Tylenol. I'm serious. You could ask Jeff." Lindsay looked at me. I nodded. "But you don't have to take that one?" she asked. "Not yet. They're saving it for the 3 days before the bone marrow transplant. That's when they have to completely kill off any cancer cells that are left, along with my entire immune system. Then the doctors just have to drip some cells from my sister's bone marrow into my veins and hope the new cells save me." Just then the warning bell rang, and Tad pushed back from the table. "Oh, gotta go. Toodles, kids." And he was gone. Lindsay turned to me and said, "How can you be so calm about this? He's going into the hospital next week. Shouldn't he be freaking?" I thought about this for for a minute, then responded, "Would a normal person be freaking? Sure. But when you're going through treatment, you don't think that way. You can't die or you die. I mean, my treatment was like a millionth of what Tad has been through, and you know what it's done to me. But I know I didn't really flip out while it was happening. There's nothing you can do about it, so you go and they stick you and you get sick and that's it. Freaking out just makes the whole ordeal harder for your mom." Is this some kind of macho guy thing? No, it really isn't. I'm not saying Tad isn't brave, he's super brave. But I've seen 3-year-old girls playing Barbies and telling their parents not to cry while they were getting needles inserted in their chest for 3 hours of high dosage chemo. Lindsay said something softly just as the passing bell rang. What? I asked. She put a hand on my shoulder, leaned in, and put her head so close to my ear that I felt the warmth of her breath as she said, "You're brave too, Jeff." I didn't tell her this, but I didn't feel brave. Truthfully, I was scared out of my mind for Tad. I had survived cancer once, which was risky enough. Surviving twice was pretty rare, and 3 times? Let's just say if this were the Kentucky Derby, Tad would be a long shot.